He thought he was just making another water run through the desert. But when Gideon Hayes, an exhausted single father with nothing left to give, stumbled upon 4 children abandoned in the middle of nowhere, something began to shift, not just in them, but in him. And what started as a rescue soon unraveled into the miracle that would heal them all. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey of courage, love, and second chances, if you find stories like this meaningful, consider subscribing. Your support helps us share more true-to-the-heart tales that matter. Now let's begin. The desert didn't breathe it. Baked late July in the Sonoran, desert didn't allow for life. It punished. The sun sat like a tyrant in the pale blue sky, scorching everything beneath it. Even the wind, when it stirred, blew like a furnace's breath, dry, relentless, cruel. Gideon Hayes squinted through the shimmer of heat rising off the hood of his white pickup truck. The paint was peeling, the engine moaned with age, and the AC had surrendered 3 summers ago. But it ran, and that was enough. Beside him, his 14-year-old daughter, June, sat quietly in the passenger seat, her sketch pad balanced on her knees. She never went anywhere without it. Since the accident, she hadn't spoken a single word, but she always drew life as she saw it, moments others missed. Today she was sketching a dead tree bent into the shape of a question mark. Gideon wiped the sweat from his brow, feeling the salt sting his cracked skin. "Just a quick check," he said aloud, mostly for himself. "Old weather station might be a busted solar panel. Won't take long." June didn't answer, but he caught her gaze. Calm, alert. She nodded once and kept drawing. They drove up a shallow incline of packed sand on the ridge above the remains of a government-issued weather outpost. Came into view corrugated tin sun-bleached signs, a water pump sticking up like a forgotten limb. But that wasn't what made Gideon's stomach tighten. There, parked at an awkward angle outside the building, was an SUV. A gray, battered one, doors open. No movement. Gideon pulled the truck to a stop about 20 feet away. "Stay here," he said instinctively. June didn't argue. He stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the scorching sand. The heat hit him like a wall. Every sound vanished, except the crunch of his steps and the dry hiss of wind across rock. As he approached the SUV, dread wrapped around his spine. The interior was sun-blasted, papers scattered. A single juice box lay on the floor, burst from the heat. And in the back seat, shapes. Gideon froze. Then he rushed forward, heart thudding. 4 children curled against one another like wilted flowers. 2 girls, 2 boys. Skin-flushed lips chapped and splitting. One child had his head slumped against the window, eyes barely open. "Oh God," Gideon whispered, already reaching inside. Hey, kiddo. Can you hear me?" The boy moaned softly. A girl whimpered. "Water," he muttered, turning back toward the truck. "They need water now." He sprinted to the pickup. June was already out, wide-eyed. Without words, she thrust a bottle of water into his hand. "Smart girl," he said breathlessly, grabbing towels and blankets from the back seat. "Bring the cooler. Slowly, don't let them drink too fast." Together, father and daughter moved with focused urgency. Gideon gently lifted each child from the SUV, carrying them to the limited shade beside the truck. June knelt by the smallest girl and poured a capful of water at a time, pressing the rim to dry lips. The child sucked weakly. "What happened to you?" Gideon murmured. "Where are your parents?" No answers. Just shallow breathing. They worked through the brutal heat. 2 hours passed. June used hand signals to calm one of the older girls who flinched at every noise. The boy in Gideon's arms finally opened his eyes and whispered, "Mommy." "She's not here," Gideon said gently. "But you're safe now. I promise." He checked his phone. No signal. The radio crackled with static. The only choice was to get them home, to safety. June climbed into the back, cradling the smallest girl. Gideon arranged the other three around them, shielding them from the remaining sun. The truck grumbled as it came to life. He gave it a pat. "Don't fail me now." They drove toward Harmony Ridge, little more than a forgotten dot on the map, but it held their trailer, a working cooler. And shade. June looked at him. "I don't know how we'll explain this," he admitted. "But we're not leaving them behind." She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. She reached over, placed her hand over his on the gear shift, and nodded. For the first time in years, Gideon felt something crack in his chest. Not pain, not loss. Something warmer. A flicker of purpose. And as they drove off into the falling dusk, the wind picked up again. Dry, yes, but less cruel. Almost like it too had chosen not to turn away. Doi jaila. Chuangdokwa tiutuet truenkam. Hung struggling single dead, found four abandoned. Kids in the desert, and a miracle he never saw coming. Viet bangtieng. Anvoijo daikwang. 105 tuja. Kiem tratukong. Jambao jung. Yeukau vachio. Saukam. Xuskau truch. Logic va truyentai gia trinhanvan. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Gideon pulled the truck up to their trailer, a weather-beaten single-wide on the edge of Harmony Ridge, flanked by desert scrub and a wind-torn American flag clinging to a crooked pole. It wasn't much, but it was home, and now it was sanctuary. He parked under the tin awning, cut the engine, and turned to June. Her arms were wrapped tightly around the smallest girl who had fallen into a restless sleep. In the back seat, the other three children lay motionless, except for the occasional twitch or moan. Their bodies were cooling from the heat, but they were still dangerously weak. "Let's move fast," Gideon said, his voice low. "We'll use the old cot, the pull-out couch, and the extra blankets. It's not perfect, but we'll make it work." June nodded and slid out of the truck, cradling the little girl with the care of someone who knew what it meant to be fragile. Gideon gently carried the other three one by one into the trailer. The small living space quickly filled with bodies, the air heavy with heat dust, and the scent of fear. He worked quickly wetting towels, spooning small amounts of applesauce and water into parched mouths, checking pulses. It was all basic triage, but it kept his hands busy and his mind from spiraling into the what-ifs. June moved with the same silent intensity. She made a nest of pillows in the corner, tucked the youngest child inside, and began fanning her gently with an old book. Every now and then, she looked at Gideon, not for direction, but for reassurance. "You're doing good, June," he said softly, "or real good." She didn't smile, but her shoulders eased a little. By the time the stars blinked into the sky, all four children were asleep. Gideon and June sat at the kitchen table, lit only by a single lamp with a cracked shade. He watched her sketch lines forming the SUV, the heat waves, the hollow eyes of the children. Her hand moved quickly, purposefully. "They didn't just wander off," Gideon said. "Someone left them, abandoned them." June paused. Pencil hovering, he took a long sip of water. "I don't know what kind of person does that, but I know what kind of person doesn't walk away when they see it." She looked up, and for a second, he saw her mother's eyes in hers. Soft, steady, fierce. "We need to call someone," he added. "Tomorrow, child services." Ruthie Lawson's still in the district. I think June gave a short nod. They didn't speak after that. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It had become a familiar rhythm in the years since the accident. A language of its own. As the night deepened, Gideon checked on the children again. One of the boys, about 7, clutched something tightly in his sleep. Gideon gently pried it loose, a piece of cloth wrapped around a small photograph. It showed a woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile, her arm wrapped around the youngest girl. On her wrist was a faint tattoo, a single wing stretched upward. Gideon stared at it, heart stuttering. He knew that tattoo. 5 years ago in a relief shelter near the Texas border, he'd met a woman who spoke with that same look in her eyes. She had talked about escape, about starting over. She'd helped clean wounds with bare hands and had once stitched up a boy's forehead with nothing but a sewing kit. Her name had been Willa. He folded the photo and slipped it back into the boy's grip. Still out there, he whispered to himself, "You didn't leave them? You lost them." He went outside for air. The desert was dark, but the sky above was brilliant with stars. He leaned against the truck and exhaled. This was too big, too dangerous. The law would get involved. There'd be questions, maybe accusations. But when he thought about those kids, sunburned, silent, clinging to life, he couldn't imagine not acting. He heard the screen door creak and turned to see June standing there, barefoot, her sketch pad pressed to her chest. She pointed to the stars, then made a sign across her heart. One of hope. Gideon gave a tired smile. Yeah, maybe this is bigger than us. Maybe that's the point. Inside, 4 children slept in safety for the first time in who knows how long. And for the first time in years, Gideon didn't feel haunted. He felt anchored. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Morning came slowly in the desert. First as a pale haze, then as a blade of light slicing the sky open. But inside the trailer, it arrived quietly. Just a soft rustling, the faintest creak of bed springs, the whispered breath of children who had slept without fear. Gideon Hayes was already awake. He stood by the kitchen counter, still in yesterday's jeans, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. His eyes were fixed on the children. 4 of them. Still here, still alive, still a mystery. The youngest girl stirred her tiny hand, grasping the edge of the worn blanket June had wrapped around her. Her cheeks were less flushed now, breathing more even, but her eyes, when they opened, held the haunted glaze of someone who had seen too much for her age. June knelt beside her, signing slowly, gently. The girl blinked, watching her hands as if trying to understand. Then miraculously, she copied the motion for safe. Gideon's chest tightened. He took a breath and walked to the back of the trailer where he'd set up the radio unit. It was old, unreliable, but sometimes picked up the sheriff's frequency. He twisted the knob until static gave way to voices. Nothing found at mile marker 72. No signs of movement. He pressed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Hayes, Gideon Hayes. I've got an urgent report." There was a pause, then a crackle. "Go ahead, Hayes. I've got 4 kids. Found them out near the North End weather station. SUV abandoned. No adults in sight. They're alive but in rough shape. I need someone out here. And I need Ruthie Lawson if she's still on rotation." Silence again, then understood. "Sending someone within the hour. Sit tight." He clicked the mic off and rubbed his hands over his face. They would come, and they would ask questions. June stood at the window, sketchpad balanced on the sill. She had drawn all 4 children, small figures nestled together beneath the truck's shadow. The desert heat warping the air around them. Gideon walked up beside her. "You think we did the right thing?" June glanced at him, then signed one word. "Always." He nodded. "Yeah." The knock came 40 minutes later. Sharp official. He opened the door to find Ruthie Lawson clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her forehead, her gray-streaked braid swinging behind her. "Well," she said, looking him over. "If it isn't Gideon Hayes, Ruthie," he said, with half a smile, still chasing strays. "Only the good ones." Her eyes swept the interior. "You've got them here." He stepped aside. The moment Ruthie saw the children, her entire demeanor softened. She crouched beside the boy with the photo gently brushing a curl from his forehead. "They look better than I expected," she murmured. "You gave them water, slowly, kept them cool. Applesauce and electrolytes." She raised an eyebrow. "Since when did you become a paramedic? Since it was either that or bury them." That quieted her. She stood scribbling notes. "We'll get them checked out at County General. I'll file an emergency custody petition for 72 hours. That gives us time to figure out who they are and where they came from." "I want to help Gideon," said. She looked at him. "I'm not saying I should keep them, but until we know what happened, they shouldn't be shuffled around. They're terrified." "You planning to fight the system?" "Gideon." "No," he said, simply. "I'm just not walking away." There was a long pause. Ruthie studied him, and then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "I'll see what I can do." That night, after the sheriff's deputy had taken photos, and Ruthie had packed up her notes, she came back inside with a bag of donated supplies, pajamas, snacks, stuffed animals that smelled like bleach, and second chances June handed out the toys. One by one, the children accepted them, still cautious but curious. The red-haired girl, now a little stronger, took a small teddy bear with both hands and held it to her chest like a secret. Later, as Gideon walked Ruthie to her car, she said, "You know what you're doing here, don't you?" "No. You're interrupting something terrible, giving it a different ending." He looked out over the desert stars blinking into view. They were alone out there. No one should have to survive that. "Most don't," she said. "But maybe they weren't meant to be alone this time." Gideon didn't reply. He couldn't. Not with the lump rising in his throat. Ruthie placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll come back tomorrow. We'll figure this out." Inside, June tucked the children into makeshift beds. The trailer felt smaller than ever, but warmer somehow. Full of breathing, soft noises, the fragile music of healing. Gideon sat on the edge of his cot, running a thumb over the photograph he'd taken from the boy's hand earlier that morning. Willa, he hadn't thought of her in years, but now the memory came roaring back the way she had stood in that relief. Shelter, sleeves rolled arms while covered in bandages and bruises. Not her own. The way she had said, "I don't know where I'm going, but anywhere's better than where I've been." And the tattoo, a wing thin and frayed, reaching for air. He looked at the smallest girl, that same red hair, that same curve in the smile. "Still out there," he whispered. He didn't know how or why, but deep down he believed it. The desert had a way of burying things, time-sound secrets, but some memories refused to stay buried. Gideon stared at the photograph on the table. The woman in it looked tired, but determined, a softness around her mouth that hadn't quite given up. Her hair was windswept, her clothes simple, but the tattoo on her wrist, a single wing curved upward like a silent prayer, was unmistakable. Willa Jensen. The name hadn't passed his lips in 5 years, but the moment he'd seen that tattoo, it came back to him in full force. He'd met her at a temporary relief station outside Laredo, Texas, summer of drought and wildfires. She'd come through barefoot with soot on her arms and a child clinging to her side. Not hers, she had said. Just someone she couldn't leave behind. She had stayed for 3 weeks, helping strangers without ever sharing much about herself. But one evening, as they'd sat outside folding blankets, she had looked at him and said quietly, "Some people aren't lost. They're just waiting for someone to come find them." Then she disappeared. No goodbye. No explanation. Now here she was, frozen in a photo clutched by a boy who looked enough like her to erase all doubt. Ruthie returned the next morning with paperwork and more questions. June made breakfast for the children, instant oatmeal with honey, and helped them settle into a routine, brushing teeth, combing hair, drawing with crayons she found in a plastic bin under her bed. One of the boys, the oldest, finally spoke. "My name's Eli," he said, voice hoarse. Gideon knelt beside him. "Eli, that's a strong name," the boy nodded solemnly. "That's what she said." Mama Gideon's breath caught. "Your mama's name is Willa." Eli looked up cautious. "You know her." "I think I do." "Buddy." "I think I might." Ruthie sat on the couch flipping through old state records but came up short. No police reports, no Amber Alerts, no missing person reports with a match to Willa Jensen or the kids. Either she stayed completely off-grid or someone made her disappear. The weight of that statement hung in the room. June passed Ruthie a fresh drawing. 4 children beneath the blazing sun, with a tall woman walking alone through sand dunes. In the distance, Ruthie studied it. "Your girl doesn't speak, but she sure as heck listens." Gideon nodded. "She sees everything." That afternoon, Gideon drove to town for supplies, more bottled water, canned fruit batteries, a spare fan. At the corner gas station, a dusty pickup rolled in behind him, and an old man with a Navy cap stepped out. "Hayes," the man said. Gideon turned. "Harley." The man chuckled. "Heard through the grapevine you brought in some lost kids. Sheriff said you looked like hell, but still managed to save 4 lives. That true?" Gideon shrugged. "They saved me just as much." Harley leaned on the cart Desert gives and takes sun. "But if you're looking for someone like this." "Willa. Best place to start is the Dry Creek Road down by Windcaller Bluff. Folks say a woman's been seen out there, walking always alone. Might be nothing, but might be more." Gideon didn't hesitate. He drove back to the trailer and packed a thermos first aid kit and a flashlight. "Where are you going?" Ruthie asked as she stepped out to meet him. "I need to follow a lead. It might be her alone." "I won't go far, just enough to see." June came out onto the porch, holding up a small piece of paper, a quick sketch of the bluff, and a narrow path through mesquite and rock. Gideon took it. His voice. "Quiet. Thank you." The road to Windcaller Bluff was barely more than a suggestion. Faint tire tracks lost beneath brush and stone. The sun was lower now, the air dry but less cruel. As he reached the bluff, he stepped out of the truck and scanned the distance. Silence. Miles of silence. But then a flicker, a movement on the horizon, a silhouette against the dipping sun. Small, slow, unsteady. He started walking. The closer he got, the clearer the shape became. A woman, thin, covered in dust, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She moved like someone who'd walked too far for too long, and when she stumbled and dropped to her knees, he ran. "Hey, you all right?" he called out. No answer. He reached her just as she was trying to stand. Her face turned toward him, eyes sunken. Skin burned and cracked, but unmistakably Willa Gideon. She rasped as if seeing a ghost. "You're alive," he said, kneeling beside her. "Willa, you're alive. I didn't know. Where else to go? I thought they were gone." "My babies. They're not gone. They're safe. With me, with June." Tears streaked through the dust on her face. She sagged into him, breath hitching. I tried to find help. I thought they'd die out there." "You saved them," he whispered. "You kept them alive long enough for someone to find them. And now we're going to take you home." That night, he brought her back in silence. Ruthie and June watched as Gideon carried Willa into the trailer, wrapped in a wool blanket, half asleep. The children were already in bed, but when Eli stirred and saw his mother, he leapt from the mattress, arms wide, voice breaking. Mama Willa collapsed to her knees, holding him, the two of them sobbing into each other's shoulders. The other kids woke, drawn to the sound, and gathered around her like moths to flame. For the first time since they'd been found, they all spoke at once. Names, cries, half-sentences. Gideon stood near the doorway, watching it all unfold, his hands shaking. June came beside him, signed just one word. Found. He nodded. Finally. For the first time in days there was stillness, not the kind that presses down with silence, but the kind that fills a place with warmth, like a campfire, that's caught just enough flame to hold the dark at bay. Willa slept through most of the morning, her breathing, soft face turned toward the open window, where desert light poured in like gold. Gideon had laid out a cot for her in the living room and kept the trailer unusually quiet, even for a home already seasoned by silence. The kids, Eli, Hannah, Nora, and little Jessie stayed close to her. They whispered, drew pictures curled up beside her with their toys, like they were afraid she might disappear again. And June, with her usual quiet grace, gave them space. She communicated in soft signs and glances, teaching the youngest how to fingerspell their names, how to ask for water, how to say safe. Gideon watched it all with the unease of a man who'd been bracing for disaster and didn't quite know how to stand when it didn't come. Ruthie came by just after noon, carrying a duffel bag of clothes and medical supplies. She should be checked by a doctor, she said, nodding toward Willa. But if she's sleeping? That's a good sign. Gideon nodded, wiping his hands on a dish towel. She walked miles through open sun. Said she thought they were dead. She was trying to find help. Ruthie's voice dropped. There's something about her story that doesn't sit right with me. No alerts, no missing persons, no custody records. You think she's hiding something? I think she's protecting them, Ruthie said softly. And I think whatever she's running from hasn't stopped chasing her. That evening, Willa woke with a soft gasp. She sat up slowly, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the trailer lights. Her voice was rough, but steady. They're really here, she whispered. All four. Gideon sat across from her, mug in hand. You kept them alive, Willa. You should have died out there, but you didn't. She looked down at her hands, weathered and trembling. I almost did. I walked until I couldn't remember my name. But their names, I never forgot those. She took a breath. I left him. Gideon, I took the kids and ran. I knew he'd come after us, so I didn't go to police or shelters. I thought the desert would hide us. Gideon leaned forward. And did he come after you? He found us outside. Yuma said I could leave, but not with them. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I waited till he passed out drunk and loaded them in the SUV. I drove west. No plan, just road. Then we ran out of gas. No signal. I told them to stay in the car. I walked until my legs gave out. You nearly died for them? They're all I've got, she said simply. I just didn't expect you'd be the one to find them. Neither did I, he admitted. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Still fixing things no one else wants to touch. He laughed, caught off guard. You remember that? Remember a man who once patched a broken fan with fishing line and duct tape, told me sometimes things don't need to be new. They just need to keep working. In the days that followed, the trailer became something it hadn't been in a long time. A home, Gideon converted the small tool shed out back into a makeshift playroom. June painted the walls with desert flowers and stars, and Ruthie brought over crates of donated books, puzzles, and second-hand furniture. Willa, once rested, became a quiet force of calm. She cooked simple meals, braided hair, told bedtime stories in a voice that held the cadence of safety. She didn't press the children for words, didn't demand they be normal. She simply made room for them to be exactly where they were. One afternoon, Gideon found her sitting outside, sanding a weathered bench he'd nearly thrown away. You don't stop moving, he said, handing her a lemonade. Stops me from thinking too hard. He sat beside her. About what? She hesitated. What if this is only temporary? What if someone takes them or me? They won't. You can't promise that. No, he said quietly, but I can promise I won't let go. She looked at him, then not startled, not searching, just seeing him. You've changed, she said. So have you. They didn't say more, but something unspoken settled between them, fragile and real, like the way rain smells before it falls. That night, as stars pierced the sky, the kids built a tent in the living room, with blankets and string lights. June brought out her sketch pad and drew them all huddled inside laughter, written in every line. Willa watched from the corner, hands wrapped around a warm mug of chamomile tea. Gideon sat beside her. You ever think, she said, that sometimes we don't need miracles. We just need someone to stay? He nodded slowly. Maybe the two are the same thing. Outside, the desert wind picked up again, but this time it didn't feel hollow. It felt like it was carrying something toward them, something unexpected, unspoken, but long overdue. The air shifted that morning, subtle at first, like a held breath. By midday, the sky above Harmony Ridge was no longer its usual sun-bleached blue. It had turned the color of worn copper, bruised at the edges, as if the heavens themselves were holding back a scream. The desert wind, which usually whispered and wandered, now came in short, erratic gusts, slapping at the trailer walls and rattling the loose edges of the tin roof. Gideon stood outside, hands on his hips, eyes narrowed toward the horizon. He'd lived through enough desert summers to know what this meant. A dust storm, a bad one. June stepped out beside him, holding a folded map in one hand and her sketch pad in the other. She looked at the sky, then at him. He signed just one word. Ready, she nodded. Inside, Willa was checking supplies, flashlights, batteries, filled water jugs, canned food. The children had grown more relaxed over the past few days, but now even they sensed something different in the air. Eli sat near the window, eyes wide and alert. Little Jessie clung to June's arm. Nora tried to keep Hannah distracted with crayons, but her fingers trembled. Gideon walked in and gently closed the door behind him. Storm's moving fast. We have maybe 2 hours, maybe less. Willa turned to face him, her face calm but pale. Will the trailer hold its held through worse, but we'll need to seal the windows, brace the porch, and make sure no one steps outside until it passes. June was already gathering duct tape and plastic sheeting. She worked fast, methodical. Willa followed her lead. Together, they turned the trailer into a bunker, edges sealed pantry. Cleared lanterns set in every room. Gideon braced the door and stacked crates against the flimsy back entrance. They turned the main living space into a kind of nest. Blankets, pillows, water games. By the time the sky turned a sickly red, they were as ready as they could be. The storm hit like a war drum. Wind howled across the flatlands, driving sand like shrapnel into every crevice and corner. The trailer shook. The children huddled close, eyes wide, fingers clenched in blankets and teddy bear. Fur dust seeped through the smallest cracks, no matter how tightly they sealed them. Gideon sat with his back against the door, legs stretched, arms resting on his knees. June leaned into him. Willa sat on the opposite side with the kids, her voice steady as she told a story about a brave hummingbird that once flew through a sandstorm to find her nest again. Her wings were torn and tired, she said, but she never stopped flying because she knew something waited for her on the other side. Jessie whispered. Did she make it? Willa looked up. Her gaze met Gideon's across the room. She did, she said softly, because she had help. The power flickered once, then twice, then went out completely. Darkness swelled, but no one screamed and clicked on a lantern. Its glow cast warm shadows against the walls. She opened her sketch pad and handed it to Eli, who looked at her surprised. Then slowly he began to draw. Hannah leaned in. Nora, too. The four of them shared one book, one pencil, and something wordless passed between them, a kind of trust. Hours passed. At some point, Gideon drifted to sleep, then woke to find Willa sitting beside him, her shoulder barely touching his. "Sorry," she said, almost a whisper. "Didn't mean to wake you, you didn't." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind rattle and moan. "I used to think storms were punishment," she said. Everyone that came felt like a reminder that I'd made a mistake, that I wasn't strong enough. Gideon glanced at her, and now I wonder if they're a kind of reset, like the Earth's way of starting over. He nodded. "We all need a reset sometimes." She looked at him, then her eyes searching. "I never told anyone the whole story." "You don't have to," he said gently, "but I want to." And so she did. She told him about the man she once trusted, who turned cruel, methodical, possessive, how every call for help had been met with disbelief or delay, how she'd stayed for the children, and how that nearly destroyed her. "I didn't want to be a victim," she said. "But when I ran, I wasn't a hero either. I was just a mother. And I was scared. You were brave," Gideon said. "Still are." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't know what happens next. If the law comes, if he comes." Gideon reached over slowly and covered her hand with his. "Then we'll face it together." The wind began to die down, the howling softening into low murmurs, like the desert sighing. June, still awake, looked at them from across the room. She smiled, not wide, but real. For the first time in days, Gideon didn't feel like the man holding a crumbling world together. He felt like part of something stronger. By dawn, the storm had passed. The trailer was dust-covered. The yard, a mess of scattered leaves and broken branches. But they were safe. All of them had stood outside, with Willa watching the sun rise through a sky scrubbed clean by wind. "We'll have to rebuild the porch," he said, half laughing. Willa touched his arm. "We can do that." He looked at her, then at the children playing quietly behind the screen door, their laughter drifting on the morning breeze. And for the first time since it all began, he let himself believe they weren't just surviving. They were becoming a family. The desert was still. Not the dead kind of stillness, but the kind that follows chaos. After the storm, every grain of sand seemed to settle with reverence. The morning sun rose slowly, bathing on harmony. Ridge in a soft amber light, as if the sky itself had exhaled. Gideon stood on the porch, what was left of it, anyway, examining the damage. A few planks had come loose. One corner post was splintered. The mesquite tree out front leaned more sharply to the east, now permanently bent by the wind. Behind him, the screen door creaked. Willa stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to him. "Still standing," she said. "Mostly." He took a sip. The coffee was hot and bitter, just how he liked it. June was already at work, sweeping debris into piles, her long hair tied in a low knot. The kids picked through the wreckage like treasure hunters, excited by every shiny piece of broken metal or odd-shaped branch. To them, the storm was already a story, something they'd tell again and again, louder each time Willa watched them with a small smile. "They're healing." Gideon nodded. "So are we." But even as he said it, something tugged at the back of his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about what she'd told him during the storm, about the man she'd run from, about how close he might still be. Later that afternoon, as they cleaned out the shed behind the trailer, June let out a soft whistle and waved them over. She pointed to the base of the fence line where the sand had been swept clean by the wind. Etched into the dirt, barely visible, was a strange pattern. Stones arranged in a circular formation with 3 small lines extending outward like rays. "What is it?" Willa asked. Gideon crouched down. "It's not natural. That formation, it's intentional. Someone left this." June flipped open her sketchbook and began recreating the symbol carefully, line by line. "Could be a signal," Willa said slowly. "Back when I worked, search and rescue hikers would sometimes leave rock markers. If they couldn't shout for help, tri-lines usually meant danger or distance." Gideon stood up, so someone left this during the storm, or just before, she said, eyes scanning the horizon, and they wanted someone to find it. He exhaled, tension rippling through him. Could it be him? Willa didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I don't know. But I do know this, if he's out there, he won't stop looking." That night, Gideon couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table studying the sketch June had drawn. The pattern felt familiar, but not in a comforting way. It stirred something in his gut. He'd seen similar formations once years ago while working with a desert search crew after a missing hiker incident. The man had left stone signals pointing toward an abandoned shack deep in the canyon, trying to guide rescuers to where he'd been trapped. Gideon stood, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped outside. Willa appeared behind him a moment later, her hair loose, her face pale in the moonlight. "You're going," she said. "Not a question. I need to know if someone's out there. If this is a warning, or a cry for help." She hesitated. "You shouldn't go alone. I won't go far," he promised, but her hand caught his arm. "Wait." She disappeared into the trailer and returned with a battered walkie-talkie. "You keep this on, and if you see anything, you call." He nodded and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The desert at night was a different creature. Shadows danced under moonlight. Every sound was amplified, each rustle, each breath of wind. Following the edge of the rock formation, Gideon moved carefully through the terrain. After half a mile, he spotted a narrow path winding through low shrubs. At the base of a ridge hidden by a tumble of dry brush, he found another rock formation, this one shaped like an arrow pointing downhill. He followed it. 50 yards down, tucked into a shallow ravine, was a makeshift shelter, blankets, tin cans, a plastic jug of water, and the remains of a small fire. Still warm, he crouched, heart thudding, a sound, a cough echoed from somewhere nearby. "Hello," he called out. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help silence." Then from behind a boulder, a figure emerged, not large, not threatening, a woman. She was thin, wrapped in a filthy hoodie, barefoot, sunburned. She stumbled toward him, eyes unfocused, lips cracked. In her hand she held a photograph creased and faded. Is this yours?" she asked. Gideon froze. The photo was of Willa and the children taken years ago. He stepped forward slowly. "Where did you get that?" I was with her. She helped me. In Tucson. Before she ran, said she was heading west. Told me if I ever got out, I should find her. She saved me from him." Gideon's blood chilled. "You knew the man she ran from." The woman nodded weakly. "He's looking, always." Looking, said she was his. Said if he found her again. She collapsed mid-sentence. Gideon caught her just in time. Back at the trailer, Willa gasped when she saw the woman. "Her name's Mina," she whispered. "We were together for a while. She was one of the only people who believed me. They laid Mina down on the couch, gave her water, wrapped her in blankets." June knelt beside her and held her hand. Gideon looked at Willa. "This isn't over." "No," she agreed. "But now we know more than we did yesterday. and we're not running anymore. Willa looked down at the sleeping children, then at Gideon. "No," she said. "We're building something worth fighting for." The desert wind had returned, but this time it whispered. It moved softly through the crevices of Harmony Ridge, rustling what remained of the front porch, threading through the wind chimes June had tied up with scraps of ribbon. It was the kind of wind that stirred old memories rather than dust. Inside the trailer, Mina slept fitfully on the couch, her body still recovering from dehydration and exhaustion. Willa sat beside her, a damp cloth in hand, eyes heavy but alert. She hadn't slept much. Neither had Gideon. He stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the sun rise behind the far ridge. He didn't say anything for a long while. And then quietly, "Do you think he's close?" Willa didn't answer right away. She looked down at Mina, then back at Gideon. If she found her way here, he might too. He turned toward her. "Then we don't wait for him." She raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "It means we stop hiding. We make this place something real, permanent something." "He can't tear apart." Willa gave a tired laugh. "You talk like we're building a fortress." He shook his head. "No, something better." That afternoon, Ruthie arrived after her shift at the county office, bringing forms, school enrollment applications, and a rolled-up map of land parcels. "I pulled some strings," she said, setting it all down on the kitchen table. "Technically, no one's contested custody yet. No extended family has come forward. The children are still under emergency placement. That gives us a window." Gideon leaned over the map. "A window for what?" "To register this land as a community safe house," she replied. "It's a long shot. But if we can prove this is more than just a trailer in the desert, if we can show it's a shelter, a service, then maybe we can protect the kids and keep Willa here without a custody war." Willa stared at her. "You're serious?" As a snakebite, Ruthie gave a crooked smile. "We've all seen too many good families get torn apart by paperwork. But I've also seen the system bend when someone refuses to walk away." Gideon glanced at June, who was helping Eli read from a worn-out children's book on the floor. The little boy's brow was furrowed in concentration, lips moving slowly over each word. "All right," he said. "Let's make this place matter." The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind. Gideon worked on restoring the old tool shed, converting it into a proper sleeping area. Willa cleaned out the side storage unit and turned it into a tiny classroom. Ruthie helped them draft a statement of purpose, while June drew a logo for what Willa quietly started calling the Wind Station. A small house nestled between cactus and stars. "You think it's silly?" she asked Gideon one night as they painted the sign together. "No," he said. "I think it's a promise." They stood there in silence for a moment, surrounded by the scent of wood, fresh paint, and the distant laughter of children. Willa's hand brushed against his as she dipped her brush again. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. That evening, as the sky deepened into dusk, Mina stirred for the first time with clarity. She sat up slowly, blinking toward the lamplight. Willa was at her side in seconds. "You're safe," she said softly. Mina looked around. "I thought I was dead." "No," Willa replied. "You're here, and you're safe." Gideon approached, pulling a chair near. "Can you tell us more about him?" Mina's eyes darkened. "He's still looking. He's got friends in bad places, people who owe him favors. He used to brag about how easy it is to disappear someone in the desert. Said no one would look too hard." Willa's face paled, but she didn't flinch. "You saw him last." Mina nodded. He was asking about Harmony Ridge. Asked if anyone had seen a woman with red hair and kids. I didn't say a word at Aran. Gideon stood. "We're going to need more than good intentions. We need protection." Ruthie, who had been listening quietly from the corner, stood as well. "Let me talk to the sheriff. If this guy shows up, we'll be ready. But you need to document everything, every threat, every step. We'll build your case like we're building this home layer by layer." That night, while the others slept, Gideon sat outside on the front steps, a lantern beside him. Willa joined him. Barefoot, her sweater pulled tight around her shoulders. "Do you believe in signs?" she asked. He looked at her. "What kind?" "The kind the desert leaves. A trail of wind, a circle of stones, a storm that brings people to your door." Gideon tilted his head toward her. "You think that storm brought Mina here? I think it brought me back to myself." She paused, then continued. "You once told me something back at the shelter in Texas. I don't think you remember." "What did I say?" "You said, some people try to survive the world, others try to change it, but the lucky ones, they get to build a new one." Gideon exhaled slowly. "Sounds like something my wife used to say." "She must have been wise. She was—" They fell into silence again. Then Willa whispered, "Do you think we could really build something here? Not just for the kids, but for us?" He looked at her, really looked. And then, instead of answering, he reached out and took her hand. It was rough and calloused like his, but warm, steady. The wind blew gently through the porch rafters. Somewhere in the distance, the coyotes sang their nighttime lullaby, and above them, stars spilled across the sky, like the promise of something vast and possible. The sun rose like it had something to prove. After weeks of searing heat and violent wind, the morning sky above Harmony Ridge was unexpectedly kind, washed in gold, with only a handful of clouds stretched thin like whispers. The kind of sky that made you believe in second chances. Gideon stood with his boots planted in freshly raked sand, looking up at the sign June had painted with care. The wind station. The lettering was bold, but gentle, cradled by a swirl of hand-drawn stars and desert flowers. Below it, Willa had added a single feather symbol of flight of escape, and now of home. He couldn't help but smile, not the weary kind he was used to, but a full, quiet one that settled somewhere deep in his chest. Behind him, the kids ran barefoot between old tires, turned into garden beds, and a clothesline fluttering with clean laundry. Their laughter had changed, no longer cautious or fragile. It rang free, full-bodied, unafraid. "Look what we built," Willa said softly, stepping beside him. Her hair was tied back, and she wore a denim apron stained with paint, flour, and hope. We had teased. She nudged his shoulder. "Don't get smug. I still say your idea to use the rusted water tank as a greenhouse will either save lives or attract snakes. Maybe both." Inside the trailer, the small dining nook had been converted into a supply shelf. Canned goods, first aid kits, toiletries, all donated by neighbors and strangers. Ruthie had made a few quiet calls, and somehow word had spread. An elderly couple from 3 towns over had brought a box of books. A retired teacher dropped off blankets. A mechanic sent used tools, and 1 good generator. "This is what happens," Ruthie had said, "when people see someone actually doing something." Willa and June started a daily routine with the children reading simple chores, cooking together. Each evening they gathered on the porch with flashlights and told stories. Sometimes real, sometimes made up. The line between the two didn't seem to matter. What mattered was the togetherness. Then, late one afternoon, while Gideon was unloading bags of soil for their small garden bed, he spotted the dust cloud. It was subtle at first, just a faint haze rising on the road beyond the ridge. He narrowed his eyes. A car, coming slow, too slow. He walked to the edge of the fence line and waited. A black sedan rolled to a stop at the far end of the property. It didn't approach the house. didn't turn off the engine. Tinted windows, unfamiliar plates. Gideon felt the hair on his neck rise. He took 2 steps forward. The car didn't move. Then, as if reconsidering it, reversed quietly, deliberately, and disappeared into the horizon. That evening, he didn't mention it. He helped Willa set the table, kissed June on the forehead after dinner, and played dominoes with Eli until the boy's eyelids drooped. But as Willa stepped outside to breathe in the night air, he followed. "Someone came today," he said. She turned. "Who I don't know. Black car." Sat there. Watched. Then left. Her face paled. Gideon reached for her hand. "We're not alone out here. Not anymore. You've got me. You've got Ruthie. You've got a whole community that's seen what this place means." She nodded slowly, but her shoulders tensed. "I just want to stop looking over my shoulder," she whispered. "You will," he said. "But first we make it clear, this place isn't just a shelter. It's a stand. If someone comes here thinking they can scare you, they'll have to go through me." She looked at him, something steady and vulnerable flickering in her eyes. "And if they go through you, then they'll find out who's behind me." Willa didn't smile, but she leaned in and rested her forehead against his chest. The next day, Ruthie brought a county deputy named Matt Connors, who walked the perimeter with Gideon and noted the tracks near the property line. "We'll add patrols," he promised. "This isn't the first time someone tried to intimidate a woman off her land. Won't be the last. But you've got rights here." "I don't want a war," Gideon said. "Good." Matt replied, "Because what you've got here, it's peace. And some people don't know what to do with that." That night, as the stars returned to their rightful places overhead, June finished a new drawing. She handed it to Willa. It was the family standing in front of the wind station. Hands joined, sun rising behind them. But there was one more figure in the background, distant, small, fading into the desert dust. "What's this?" Willa asked gently. June signed, "A shadow." "But we're facing the light." Willa touched her cheek. "Yes, baby. That's exactly what we're doing." Gideon watched from the doorway, heart full. They were no longer survivors, clinging to a scrap of peace. They were something more dangerous to the darkness. They were whole. The day of the open gathering dawned crisp and blue, as if the desert itself had paused to listen. A hand-painted sign at the edge of the property read, "Welcome to the wind station, a place to begin again." Below, it hung a simple banner fluttering in the breeze. Free water, hot food, open hands. By late morning, cars began pulling in dusty pickups, station wagons, a few out-of-town SUVs. People came with folding chairs, mason jars of sun tea, baskets of corn muffins. Some came curious. Others came quiet, like they'd carried something for too long and needed somewhere to set it down. Gideon stood near the entrance in his work boots and sun-faded shirt, shaking hands, pointing to the shade tent, smiling more than he had in years. June moved through the gathering with grace. She taught a few of the smaller kids basic signs, helped serve lemonade, and handed out drawings she'd made of the wind station. Each one signed simply June. Inside the trailer, Willa was braiding Hannah's hair while keeping an eye on the stew simmering in a large pot. Mina sat at the table with Ruthie working through a list of names, women from nearby towns who might need shelter food, or just someone to say me too. It was more than an event. It was a declaration. Around noon, Ruthie clinked a spoon against her glass. "Can I have your attention?" The crowd quieted. Some shaded their eyes to see better. "I've been working in social services for 26 years, she began, and I've seen my share of temporary shelters and patched up plans. But this," she motioned behind her, "this is different." She gestured to Willa, to Gideon, to June. This was built on nothing but courage, kindness, and love. No one was paid. No one was promised anything, and yet people kept showing up. One board. One meal, one frightened child at a time. A pause. And today, I'm proud to announce that the wind station has been officially registered with the county as a recognized emergency family sanctuary, which means these kids have a home. This land has protection and no one is going to tear this place down. The applause was thunderous. Gideon felt Willa's finger slip into his. He looked down, startled, but she didn't let go. Neither did he. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Eli climbed onto the wooden pallet stage they'd set up and cleared his throat. "I wrote something," he said. Cheeks flushed. Willa nodded from the front row. "Take your time, honey." The boy looked at the paper in his hand, then began. "My name is Eli. I used to be scared a lot. Sometimes I still am. But now I'm not scared of being alone. Because this place, this family, it's like when you're out in the storm and you see a porch light, and even if it's far, you walk toward it, and you don't stop walking. And when you finally get there, someone opens the door and says, 'You made it.' That's what this place is. The porch light, silence, then tears, then applause so loud it startled a bird into flight. As night fell and the last of the visitors left, Gideon and Willa found themselves alone on the porch. She leaned against the railing, arms folded across her chest, watching June chase Jessie and Nora through the shadows, their laughter like music in the dark. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm overwhelmed in a good way." He looked at her. Really looked. "Yeah, in the best way." They stood like that for a while. Then softly she said, "I never thought I'd get this back. This belonging safety. The chance to look someone in the eye and not be afraid." Gideon took a step closer. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Willa met his gaze, then reached up and touched his cheek the first time. After all the shared moments that her touch was deliberate. "Unguarded," I know she whispered. And then there under the stars and porch light, they kissed, quiet. Slow, like two people who had already promised everything without needing to say a word. Inside, June turned out the lights and tucked the children in. She smiled to herself, a rare, full smile, then walked to the window and looked out at the night. Something caught her eye. A car parked far off, barely visible on the ridge. She stiffened. The engine idled. Then the headlights flashed twice, and then it was gone. She walked quietly to the porch and found Gideon and Willa still holding each other, wrapped in a hush neither wanted to break. She signed slowly. "Someone watched us again." Gideon's face changed. He nodded once. "Okay." Willa's grip tightened. "Is it him?" "We don't know," he said. "But we'll be ready." She looked at the house, the shed, the tent, the children's beds inside. "No matter what happens," she said, "we don't run." Gideon looked at her, his voice steady. "Never again." And above them, the desert wind rose not fierce, but firm, as if it remembered every soul that had once been forgotten, and wasn't willing to forget them again. It began just before sunrise, the kind of quiet that felt too still, the kind that knew something was coming. Gideon felt it in his bones, long before the dog barked, before June came to his bedside, signing with urgent hands, "Truck, coming." Not local. He rose instantly. Willa was already slipping on her boots, her eyes wide but clear. She didn't ask questions, neither did Gideon. They both knew. Some things don't need language anymore. By the time they stepped out onto the porch, the pickup had stopped just outside the property line. Black dust covered one door opened. A man stepped out. Medium height, leather jacket, thick beard, sunglasses. He didn't shout, didn't wave, just stood there. Watching, Eli peered through the window, whispering, "That's him. Gideon's chest tightened. Willa took a slow, shaky breath, but didn't move. She stepped forward instead, planting her feet beside Gideon's. "I'm not hiding, no." Gideon said, "You're not." Ruthie arrived minutes later, followed by Deputy Matt in his cruiser, blue lights off but presence unmistakable. The man didn't run. He didn't need to. He believed fear would do the running for him, but this time, fear stayed put. Willa stood across from the man who had once called himself her husband. She didn't speak first. She waited. He shifted his weight. "You took my family," he said, voice low. "No," she replied calmly. "I saved them from you. You don't get to decide that I didn't decide." She said I survived. "That's different." Deputy Matt stepped between them. "Sir, this is registered land. You're trespassing, and there's an active protective order pending from the county judge. I suggest you leave." The man stared at Willa, then at Gideon, who hadn't moved. "You think you can keep what's mine?" Gideon's voice was quiet. "They're not yours. They never were. You want to fight?" "No," Gideon said. "I want peace. But I won't back down to keep it." The man took a step forward and stopped, because behind Gideon, a dozen people had gathered. Neighbors, friends, visitors from the gathering. Ruthie, Mina, June, the children all standing in silence. A wall made not of bricks, but of choice. And the man whose name no one spoke realized something that men like him rarely do. He had no power here. Not anymore. He turned without a word, climbed into the truck and drove away. The wind picked up in his wake, scattering sand and brittle leaves, but it couldn't shake the ground beneath their feet. That night, the wind station was quiet in the way. Only a place that has weathered something important can be. The children slept soundly. Mina made hot cocoa and added a little too much cinnamon. Ruthie sat by the fire pit, journal in hand, writing something she wouldn't let anyone see. June finished a drawing, a girl standing on a rock, arms wide, letting the wind carry her hair. She handed it to Willa, who held it like it was sacred. "I always thought the desert was empty," Willa said softly. "Sitting beside Gideon on the porch, I thought it took and never gave back." Gideon looked out toward the horizon, where the moon was rising golden and whole. "It gives," he said, "but only to those who stay long enough to listen." She looked at him. "Why did you stay, Gideon?" He turned to her eyes, steady. "Because someone needed to. Because love doesn't always come with fireworks or music. Sometimes it shows up in a dust storm with 4 starving kids and a woman who doesn't know how remarkable she is." Willa's eyes welled. "You saved me." He shook his head. "No. You all saved me. I was surviving, going through the motions. And then, one day, the desert gave me a reason to hope again." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch, worn at the edges. "This was my grandmother's," she said. "She told me to give it to someone when I was ready to build a life, not just escape." One inside was a simple silver ring, carved with a wing motif, delicate, weathered, beautiful. She pressed it into Gideon's palm. "I don't know what tomorrow brings, but I want to face it with you." He didn't say anything, just wrapped his fingers around hers. Weeks later, under a sky dusted with spring rain and wild poppies blooming in stubborn patches across the sand, the wind station hosted a quiet ceremony. No suits, no aisle, just 5 children holding wildflowers, just Willa in a soft cream dress, and Gideon in a clean flannel shirt standing under an old mesquite tree that June had tied with ribbons. As they exchanged vows, words full of memory, pain, laughter, and healing, Mina read a blessing about second chances. Ruthie wiped away tears and pretended it was the wind. The guests clapped as the couple kissed, and someone cheered to miracles. But no one laughed, because they all knew this place. This home was one. Later that night, after the fire died down, and the stars blanketed the sky like witness and witness-bearer, Gideon stood alone in the dark, not because he was lost, but because he was full. June stepped beside him, holding her newest sketch. She handed it over. It showed the wind station from above, a warm, glowing hub in the center of the vast desert. And in the sky, faint but clear, were the words, "We were found, and we stayed." Gideon smiled, tears rising. "Yeah," he whispered, "we did. Sometimes the hardest places bloom the brightest miracles. And sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into. It's the one that finds us when the world forgets." If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know where in the world are you watching from. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one, and they truly mean the world to us. And if you'd like to hear more stories that remind us of the goodness still out there, consider subscribing. It helps us keep sharing hope one story at a time. Thank you for spending part of your day with us, from our little corner of the desert to wherever you are. Take care, stay kind, and never stop believing in second chances.